presentation come on? All right, thank you. Thank you for having me. The campus is amazing, by the way. I've never actually been here before, but like oceanfront views everywhere. It's amazing. Stop it over. Oh, is it on there? Perfect. So yeah, today I'd love to talk a little bit about what we call player-owned economies. And we also put "and blockchain" in quotes. And the reason I put it kind of in brackets here, because I think the reason for doing that is that I think there's really two parts of blockchain, right? There's the blockchain tech side, the platform, the actual distributed ledger tech, and then there's the cryptocurrencies and all that fun stuff that goes into ICOs and all that. So I'm mostly focusing on the tech side today, a little less on the cryptocurrency side. But we really think that the concept and the tech behind blockchain is going to have a major effect on gaming, kind of across the board. So I've been very fortunate to be able to build some amazing games. So these are the games I've been able to build. Like I said, I was one of the studio heads at Activision. We actually had 9 studios, so I ran one of the 9. We got to work on that top row and actually the Skylanders title as well. And then I got to do a game called Marvel Strike Force, which last year was a top 25 mobile game. It did about $200 million last year. And then we did a small, very small, and you can barely see it here. Maybe it's, yeah, you can barely see it because it didn't make a whole lot of money, called Blade Runner Revelations for VR. So we've got to play around in a lot of different areas. And one thing we learned is that even if the games do very well, and they really have, they're very, very profitable, profits don't necessarily mean longevity, right? And that's one thing that's really interesting. Games can make a lot of money, and then they can fall off fairly quickly. Call of Duty is kind of made to do that, to be real honest, because a new one comes out every year, and they want you to spend again. But one thing we did look at then is, what are the games that have staying power? What are the games that stick around for a long time, over a decade? And I started looking at some different games that you see up here, and a lot of these you probably have heard of, right? And what's really amazing is most of these games are 10 to 15 years old now at this point. Even Roblox. Roblox is kind of this new game that everybody's talking about recently. They just hit 100 million players a month a couple months ago. It's been around for almost 15 years, which is kind of amazing, right? So what's the common theme of a lot of these games? And I think the theme we found is they're driven by the players, right? They're built to be driven by the players. They're not necessarily trying to walk you through every step. They're not putting you on rails. They're really trying to make sure that you can do what you want to do. You can build what you want to build. You can partner up, and you can kind of build the game and make the game what you want. And we think that's really, really important to have longevity. And longevity can really, really increase the amount of money you can make in that game and increase the community over a really long period of time. I was at the panel with Rob Pardo, who's one of the creators of World of Warcraft, and we just said, all you have to do in gaming these days is get a game to stick around for 15 years, and then you just slap classic on it and release it again. So that's the secret apparently to games now, is just get it to last 15 years and you're good for another 15 years. So they're doing very well with that one. So we started looking, when I left Seismic, after we sold it to Niantic, the guys who make Pokemon Go, we had this theory of what we saw with players wanting to have a bigger role, right? Even bigger than what you're seeing in some of these big worlds, right? And so we started watching, and what we saw is that if you start looking at it, we're sitting on this $140, $150 billion market, right? It's a huge industry. I mean, it's massive compared to even Hollywood or films or most of these other entertainment platforms. So we're sitting on this industry, and what you see is that anytime we've let players or creators have the ability to make content and get paid for that content, these new multi-billion-dollar industries are emerging very quickly, right? So the first one I think a lot of people know about, streaming, right? Broadcasting, streaming, Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, a lot of different pieces there. That's become a $5 billion a year business outside of APAC. That doesn't even include APAC. Pretty amazing, and that's a very short period of time. Twitch is hitting 1 billion hours a month. YouTube is 48% gaming now. All of YouTube is 48% gaming. That is absolutely remarkable, right? And this is giving the players and creators the power to start making a living in games, right? We think that's fascinating. The next one was esports, right? Most people have heard of esports now, $1 billion industry, probably going to be $2 billion within a year or two. So now you have the ability to get sponsored. You have the ability to play for tournaments and all these new fun things that you're getting paid to do. People are getting salaries to play on an esports team. So that's pretty amazing next, right? What's amazing though is both of those are still outside of the game. They're not making money in the game themselves, right? So, got some missing graphics here, I'll put this up. So we started then looking at how are players being entrepreneurial, right, in games? What are they doing to kind of be entrepreneurial and make these games their own? The first one we found was modding. So modding, if you guys know modding, everybody knows modding of a game. It's pretty common these days. It's been around for almost 20 years probably. Players figure out ways to get content. This is probably the weirdest one I'd seen, well, not the weirdest one, but very strange when they put Toy Story into Grand Theft Auto. Because, I guess. But it just shows that there's usually not giving game developers support. Players just do it. Players figure out ways, even if there's not tools, a lot of times they'll figure out ways to do it. So it kind of shows this entrepreneurial spirit of, I'm going to put content into my favorite worlds, right? The other one is farming and boosting. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. Probably the biggest example of this is people farming gold in World of Warcraft, selling it on eBay, selling it to other players, right? There's a whole kind of underground industry that breaks pretty much every terms of service. It breaks every EULA of every game right now, but people are doing it to the tune of $1 billion, $2 billion a year. eBay is a great example of this. They get cease and desist pretty much every hour, I think, of people selling something illegally and taking it down. Fortnite's probably the latest example. I don't know if you guys remember the marshmallow skin from about 5 or 6 months ago. You could buy that for $15 in the game. It's now selling on eBay for about $350. So it's showing that there's an economy, this gray market economy behind the scenes. So what if we could start legitimizing that, right? What if we could actually take this 20-year-old kind of game economy model, which is really a one-way street. So right now, players are literally spending $140 billion in one way. And they're not getting anything back. They're buying personal satisfaction. And we love personal satisfaction, that's awesome. But what if they could actually get something out of that, right? What if you could actually bring a segment of the players and bring other content creators into the economy, right? Could be pretty amazing, right? There could be a bigger total addressable market, way bigger than $150 billion over time, if you can start doing that. And you start letting them actually slowly play in the economy itself. That's what we call a player-owned economy, and that's what we're really focused on right now. So to do that, you have to have the ability to have ownership, right? So you have to have the ability to kind of let people, brands, content creators, players, own items, right? They need to have a way to own game items. They have a way to own blueprints and a way to own soundtracks and really anything in a game. You want to have that. So we're kind of working with the US blockchain, love it or hate it. It is pretty working well for what we need it to do, at least. I think there's some other chains you could also work at right now. But it is getting there. And so we love the concept of blockchain just in the nature of what it's doing, right? We're actually running what's called a side chain or a sister chain or whatever you want to call it right now. I don't know how technical people are, but we're running literally a side chain of one node, which is essentially called a database. But the idea is that eventually we can distribute that. Eventually we can have it decentralized over time as we roll out these games. The second piece is you need standards, right? So if you're going to suddenly take game objects and let them be sellable, the ultimate goal is not just let them sell in the game, but let them sell outside of the game. Let them sell in other markets. Let them be sold by the players, right? To do that, you have to have standards. You have to have the ability to trade them, to exchange them, to render them outside of the game, which is not an easy task. I'll kind of show you what that means in a second. And then the last one is if you're going to have the ability to have ownership, you need to have the ability to have liquidity. You need the ability for players to be able to easily sell these objects in a fraud-free manner and an easy way, very frictionless ability to do that. And that's where blockchain comes in. So I'll kind of walk through a little of this. The first one I want to kind of go through is D-Goods, though. So I think this is a big challenge for gaming, is game developers work really hard to make their games look perfect, right? To look like their vision. I have a voxel-based game like Minecraft. I want it to look like Minecraft. If it's in the game, if I'm going to let somebody take that asset out of the game, still want it to look like that, right? Our first game is this little weird lucha dude up in the top. So they're actually little vinyl toys. We spend a lot of time on making them look like little vinyl toys, right? So if we're going to suddenly put them in a wallet, put them in a mobile app, put them on eBay, we want them to look like that. So D-Goods is kind of our standard. It's an open source standard. You can check it out at dgoods.org. It's built essentially initially for EOS. Microsoft just adopted it for the new Azure blockchain that they're doing, which is pretty cool that they've kind of picked up our standard. We have another group out of South Korea that's going to be adopting this as well. But this is what's starting to happen in gaming, and I think this is really fascinating. There's some other groups too, and I'll probably be careful with some of those logos because they haven't fully been announced yet, but there's some cool pieces up there too to where fiat marketplaces, real currency marketplaces now are starting to look at taking blockchain type tech and enabling it for real currency. And that's where things start getting really powerful, I think, in our opinion. So the ability, to me, this is kind of the holy grail, to be able to play a game, get an asset, blend the asset, craft a new asset, level that asset up, hit a button, sell it on eBay. That's pretty cool. That'll start changing how economies work, right? So those are the types of things that blockchain can kind of make that happen behind the scenes. So we've seen some of the blockchain games out there. There's been a few out there already. And I think there's some good and bad. I think the bad is they're literally played by a couple hundred people. It's not awesome. That's not a great place to be. We put out soft launches of games and you'll have 10, 15,000 people playing it. Some of these games right now are literally, they're so complicated, they're so hard to set up. they're not played by a lot of players. So that's, to me, the downside right now, and it's pretty obvious why. I don't know if anybody's ever like done a crypto transaction and sent it to somebody else and held their breath for 30 seconds hoping it ends up in the other place. That's not perfect right now for consumers, right? So that's one of the challenges we have as an industry on the cryptocurrency side. That's again why we're focused a little bit more on the blockchain tech side right now. But there are some great lessons that are coming out of this, right? There's new models around digital ownership popping up almost every day. CryptoKitties is probably the first one. I wouldn't call necessarily CryptoKitties a game, but it's definitely a gamified market, right? There's some really cool stuff that's happening with that. And you've seen these assets. Some of these assets have sold for over $100,000 US, which is pretty remarkable. And I think what you're seeing is there's new abilities to have new ways to sell digital objects that are kind of gamified. The second one, I think, is a very, very powerful. I was just talking to somebody in the back here. Pre-sales are really, really powerful for developers. It's a great way to raise money for your game. It's a great way to jumpstart that community. And there's a lot of people doing a beautiful job on trying to basically do pre-sales even before the game's out, right? So you can almost have this whole new step, kind of even before your game's even in alpha, maybe a little bit past prototype, to suddenly do a pre-sale for that game and start building up that community and, frankly, raising some money to help you finish that game. So we think that's a very, very powerful piece of what's happening when you have the ability to have assets that are owned, right? And this one is really, really early, but if you look at terms, one of the two big terms we use in the game industry is ARPU, which is average revenue per user, and they call it RPPU, which is the worst name ever, but it's average revenue per paying user, right? So how much are you making overall out of all your users, and how much are the users that are spending, how much are they actually spending? One thing that's happening with these blockchain games and games with ownership is those numbers are astronomical. Like literally some of these games are doing $15 per day per user, which is just ridiculous. I mean, it's probably, I think the average mobile game, like a Clash of Clans, or I'm sorry, not Clash of Clans, a Candy Crush or some game like that is doing like 12 cents per day. And these games are doing $15 a day. So it's literally 2 orders of magnitude bigger, which is pretty amazing. So again, pretty low data right now, so I think we gotta watch that as we go. But I think what you're seeing is by using blockchain right now behind the games, giving ownership back into kind of this economy, you can start really getting a lot of traction very early from a segment of users. So, how do game developers use these tools, right? And I think the one thing to think about is that it really is a palette of tools. And I think that's one thing. And I'm actually gonna start with my last point here, and then I'll kind of go into the other ones. If your game sucks, it's gonna suck with blockchain. That's how it works, right? So blockchain doesn't fix your game. And I think we've seen a lot of that misnomer right now. People are like, I'm just gonna add blockchain to this game, and it's gonna be awesome, you know? No, it's gonna still suck if it sucks before, right? So it has to be gaming first and blockchain second, right? You have to use it as a tech. It has to use it as a palette of tools. I don't know how many are studying game design. Is anybody studying game design or just fascinated? So there's some people in here. Again, what you'll see is in game design, there's so many tools to pull from, right? You have audio pipelines, you have animation pipelines, you have networking stacks, you have multiplayer chat systems, all these things you can kind of use. And it's the same concept with blockchain, that you're really using that as a palette, right? What do I need for my game? How do I use it into my game? So again, it's not just to flip the switch and blockchain works. It's really, how do I think about my game and how assets could be owned, and how could they actually how can the economy grow if people can trade, right? And you have to think about that from the very beginning. But with that, I think there's some really, really cool concepts that start coming out of this that we didn't have accessible before. Things like smart contracts are really, really powerful. The ability, we kind of have smart contracts in a game, but what smart contracts can start doing is releasing that outside of the game, right? So the game is not controlling everything. You're putting these smart contracts into the world, and people can execute them however they want. So the way I view it is it's kind of like this crazy extended API that is, obviously immutable, and the community ultimately kind of runs over time, which is really, really fascinating. So you can have these payout splits. You can do all types of different stuff. So I think that's going to be a really amazing part as we go. Token economics, I think they're really, really fascinating, but they're really, really early, right? If you go into a group like EA or Activision and say, hey guys, let's do a token economy, and you're in Call of Duty, they'd be like, yeah, there's the door. They're just not ready for that yet, right? They just don't want that. But if you can go in and say, hey, look, we're going to use blockchain tech to allow esports teams to sell digital items into the game, which is going to increase the franchise value of those esports teams, you're going to get their attention right now, right? So again, it has to be what they need. It has to be maybe a little less token-centric right now, but I think we're going to get there very soon. And the reason I think we're going to get there really soon is some of the concepts, dividend-producing tokens, staking of tokens, staking to have a community voice. Those are all really, really powerful concepts that will kind of go into blockchain or go into gaming in the future, but I think we're still a little early right now for that. So we are focused 100% on this trend. So when I left my last company, we got offered some great games. We got offered some amazing IPs, but we really want to focus. We really think this is going to be the future of gaming. So we're kind of focused around this. I don't want to spend too much time on what we're doing, but we think there's this amazing ecosystem that starts coming out of this. So we're really kind of focused on that game economics side. We have some studio tools that are kind of like 3D tools to allow content creators to bring those assets into the game. One thing we learned very quickly is if you have a 3D game and you say, hey, I'm going to go after a kid robot designer, I'm going to go after a deviant art designer and let them design a character in my game, they have no idea how to do that. So you kind of handhold them a little bit. So that's what our studio piece is. And I'll show you a little bit more on what we're doing in a second here. So this is where ultimately where this thing gets very powerful, right? It becomes a true residual model for gaming, and we don't have that right now. Even things like I'll mention that Fortnite deal again. So the Fortnite Marshmallow deal. Marshmallow got paid one time, right? He got paid a ton of money. Let's not kid ourselves. There's like $4 million to do that deal. But he got paid one time. And now what you're seeing is 6 months later, his $15 characters are selling for $350, right? Which means the value of what his art, the value of his IP is grown over time, but he doesn't get paid for that. And frankly, neither does Epic. So what happens in a model like this, and what happens with blockchain, is you can start doing some amazing pieces to where, that initial sale, the developer gets paid, right? We already do that. That's great. But then if you allow it to be sold in game again, the developer gets paid again, right? Nope. And I have dev and dev. That was my mistake. 85% supposed to go to the player, 15% to the dev, sorry. So the idea there is that you can actually take out a little fee, so the game developer is going to pay it a second time. And then it sells via mobile wallet, and you make a little bit more money, right? And kind of those items could end up selling 5, 6, 7 times a piece. So imagine if this Fortnite sale, if those sales were selling now for $350 and you took out 15%, basically means Epic and Marshmallow are going to make $50 per trade forever on those assets, which is over three times what the initial value was when they sold it the first time. So this is what we get excited about. This is what we're starting to see brands get excited about as well, to where you can start having a true, provable model to where they're getting paid on what the value is. Now, if that value goes way down, if they suddenly are only worth $4 per asset, they're still getting paid, they're just not getting paid as much, right? So it starts opening some really amazing new ways to do business. So this is kind of what I was mentioning before. This is our studio tool we have. This is one of our little characters named Starry. So this was created by a Kid Robot. I don't know if you guys know Kid Robot. It's a vinyl toy company. We actually said, hey, well, let's go bring vinyl toy artists into a vinyl toy video game. And what was cool about it is, again, what we learned very quickly is even though they make vinyl toys for a living, they have no idea how to, they know Photoshop, they know Illustrator really well, they have no idea how to do 3D design. So we basically kind of put some tools out there. But again, what's getting people super excited, and we talked to, I think, maybe 15 artists, and I think 14 of them signed up right away because, one, they're getting a digital economy for their craft, and two, they're getting a true residual, and blockchain tech makes that happen. It makes them really get the value of whatever their IP is over the long term of those assets, and people are getting very excited by this. The ultimate result for video games is that it can do a lot of things, right? It can be closer ties to esports teams, so esports teams that have big influence over the game can now be part of that ecosystem. Streamers, influencers, as they're streaming now, maybe they have their own assets. Maybe they have their own ninja or their own Pokemon or something like that that they can now bring into the game and actually make money, not only just being live on camera, but actually having their influence kind of result in the game economy itself. It can lower your marketing costs. It can give you new revenue streams. There's a lot of amazing things that blockchain will start doing for these video games. So who are these content creators? I think we've tried to look at that world pretty heavily. And we kind of think there's 4 main buckets of content creators over time. The first one is players. Giving players the tools to say, hey, I got an idea for a new sword, or I got a new idea for a new drone army, or whatever it is, right? Whatever game it is, a new race car, a spoiler that says unicorn spoiler. I don't know, that's probably a terrible idea. But some type of spoiler for a race car or something like that, right? That you can suddenly bring that into the game, and you can be an entrepreneur within these games you're already playing. We think that's a pretty amazing segment of users. I don't know what the time is. Timing? No, we're good. We're good. Listen. Okay, cool. The second one is retail brands. We think this is pretty fascinating. When I was at Activision, we had a lot of people. We did a couple deals with Call of Duty. We did a Doritos deal, a Mountain Dew deal. But those deals were very difficult to do, partly for these reasons. I'd say the two main reasons was, one is brands want content control, game developers want content control. And those usually conflict, So there's ways now to have that collaboration. You can start unlocking the value there. But most importantly, again, let's say, I'm going to use, these are all hypothetical. Let's say Marvel want to go into Call of Duty. They say, hey, we're going to bring in Winter Soldier. But we think Winter Soldier is worth more than a Call of Duty soldier, right? So how do you make that deal work? How do you express the true value to Marvel of what that's worth? Blockchain can start doing that, right? As I mentioned, as you start having a true residual model, if the value of Winter Soldier drives up over 6 months, Marvel's going to benefit from that. And that's going to start unlocking a lot more deals out of this. The pro artists, kind of what I was mentioning, we talked to groups like Shepard Fairey and Cause and some really big artists, and they're really fascinated to have a new portal into revenue, frankly, a new way to make money off their craft. And then the last one I think is fairly self-explanatory. It's celebrities, influencers, esports teams, things like that. If you give them an ability to bring their content into games, it's a huge, huge market, and it's you get their attention very quickly, and we've already seen that firsthand. There's a lot of really big names that want to be in this space, which is fascinating. So here's some examples of what we've done. The first three here are kind of some of those artists, and I think what's really cool for our game in particular is that we're able to kind of tap into all these micro communities, right? So these top three are essentially, so there's two guys, the two on the ends are a guy named John Paul Kaiser, who's a vinyl toy artist. He's actually in LA right now at a vinyl toy convention that's still going on. And then the middle guy's a guy named Kronk from South Africa. So again, these guys each have an audience of 50, 60,000 followers. So we're letting them bring designs into our game. They're going to get paid on the initial sale. They're going to get paid on secondary sales, all tracked by the blockchain. But what happens is it brings their audiences into the game. So just these two alone brings us an audience of 80,000 people that are going to suddenly be aware of our video game, right? Okay. The bottom two are essentially kind of retail brands. So, the bottom left is a retail brand. So we're talking to Vans. So what if Vans can bring their art in? And again, I think what's really amazing here is you don't have to bring it in so it's right in your face around, hey, this is Vans, right? You bring in their essence of who they are and what they represent, and they'll suddenly support us, and they're looking at doing, they've even offered doing like shoe deals and stuff like that for a video game, which is kind of a cool new opportunity to market a game. The one on the right is Pokimane. So we don't have a deal with her yet. This is kind of a concept. But Pokimane is a streamer. She has 5 million followers. So imagine if the first character, that first pink character, she could sell in the game. And she's getting a cut of every sale that happens in the game and a cut of every secondary sale. But let's say that second character is a limited edition 1 of 1,000, which you can track very easily on blockchain to where suddenly there's a 1 of 1,000. Yeah, I got number 1, I got number 2, I got number 3. And those are given out to her followers for free. So she makes no money when they sell initially because she's giving those away. But every time, if there's only 1,000 of those and she has 5 million followers, you can kind of imagine where that secondary value is going to go, right? We've seen this in retail. We've seen it in a lot of other industries. That can skyrocket very quickly. So if it sells on eBay later on, she's going to get a cut of the value of that down the road, which is really, really fascinating now to reward your followers and still make money off of it when there's value attached to that asset. And then the last two could be just for her. Maybe it's a one of a kind, right? So when she's playing that game, she has her own character that only if you're seeing that character in the game, you know it's her. It's authenticated as her. It's proven as her. At the end of the day, she could essentially, auction that off to charity. She could do whatever she wants, right? These models didn't exist before blockchain tech, or at least not very, very transparently, right? And that's what we're excited where blockchain goes for this. So let's take that same residual model. It's not too hard with the smart contract to suddenly say, let's add another party in that contract, right? And let's have that provable, it'll have it provable, it's immutable, it's out there, right? To where now what happens is, let's say the dev's getting 80% up front, and their deal, again, arbitrary deals, but let's say they're giving 20% back to the creator. So Marvel's getting a 20% cut, or Pokimane's getting a 20% cut when it sells in the store. But then let's say those items sell another 15 times a piece, right? To where we're taking a fee, so we get paid every time it sells. The creator is getting paid every time it sells, and the seller is getting the majority of that money. So that starts getting really cool. It's some different ways to kind of make that happen. You can just turn this off now. What's that? So you can start seeing where this gets very, very, very powerful over time. And there's actually, we get a lot of questions of why would game developers do this? This is why. They'll end up making more money. They have different ways to market. They have different ways to bring people into their audience. So, almost done here. Yep. One thing I do want to warn: if you're getting into this space, watch the regulations. I think this is a new space for a lot of people. If you, one quick example, if I basically let someone use a loot box, which is a very common mechanic in a video game where you don't know what's in the box, it's random, it could be rare, it might not be rare. If I let somebody buy that for cash and then sell it for cash, that's gambling in almost every country in the world, so you got to be a little careful around that. But I think there's some really cool stuff you could do. But the regulations are something we're definitely watching for as an industry. But I think it's definitely worthwhile, and we're going to see a huge opportunity here. So we're actively working on most of these concepts in a game called Blankos. So you can check it out at blankos.com. Be coming out a little bit later next year. And that's my talk. So you can hit me up on Twitter, LinkedIn, email, whatever you guys want if you have additional questions. So. All right.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no.